convention left, and they're hanging out in Maryland. So yeah. It's a hurricane. What are you gonna do, right?
Some resources to actually support people that are
Yeah.
political.
It's just politics.
It's a fascinating experiment on not having a president in 4 years.
Well, we still have a president. It's a president of deregulation. And discrimination.
And fights with everyone in the world.
Yeah. I over the weekend I pounded the Vietnam on PBS, Ken Burns, and it's just like, oh wow, look at what a real president does, but look what a real president does when they really fuck things up.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I love the fact that there's so much energy at this moment, that everybody's chatting and getting to know each other. The good and fun news, especially for those of you in the back, yo, Andrew, Shayna, Gilad, I'm going to call you out by name because this is the moment in which we actually get to turn our attention to an opportunity that we have to listen to some awesome information from a dear friend. And don't worry, there's plenty of time to socialize afterwards. I am absolutely delighted and honored to have Tim O'Reilly here with us at a Databite. How many of you have never been to a Databite before? Is this your first Databite? Fabulous. So our Databite series at Data and Society is an opportunity for people to come and hear really invigorating ideas, get a moment to ask curious questions, and really be engaged in some of the hardest and most interesting challenges of our time. If you haven't been to Data and Society activities and you're not signed up, see Audrey. That is Audrey right there. She can make sure that you are connected to all sorts of interesting opportunities here at Data and Society. My name is Dana Boyd. I'm the president and founder of Data and Society. Raise your hand if you're part of Data and Society. Look at all of these amazing people you can also talk to about the really cool things that are going on here. Fabulous. So at this point, I want to take a moment to introduce Tim and his book. This book came out today? Yesterday. Woohoo! So we are so excited to have him here as sort of, I guess, his first public speech about the book now that's out. Now, the good news is, above all else, you can buy the book. Hint, buy the book. That is one of your responsibilities here. Buy the book. It is being sold here, cash or credit, for $35. Buy the book. The book is called What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. Of course, conveniently acronymed, where you can backronym to your heart's delight about what that might actually mean. And one of the things that Tim is known for is really thinking through issues of technology and the broader social impacts. He's been doing this work for a long time. I don't know how many of you are geeks in this room, but I certainly grow up seeing O'Reilly media publications sort of from the first days, right? Like, you learn to program using a lot of the manuals that his team put out. But over the time, O'Reilly Media has gone and really thought through more consistently, what is technology about? How do we understand it? What are its implications? And Tim has one of the most nuanced and wide, diverse perspectives on a whole variety of different tech activities that are going on because he's been here and been involved and knows so many of the players. And that's why this book is actually really exciting to see. I think it's also his first book that's not published by himself, which is also pretty fascinating. And I think it's sort of neat to actually think about what it means for a publisher to publish, more generally to a broader audience. And so I am excited to have Tim here. And without further ado, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. So, as Dana suggested, WTF is a phrase that we all use. It's pregnant with meaning. WTF can mean two things. It can be this expression of amazement and delight. So, for example, today I biked here, with a little, thing in my ear. It was telling me turn by turn which street to turn onto to have a bike lane. A few years ago, Mike is here. All right, should we do that? Just switch. A few years ago, that would have been, an occasion for amazement. Now we just take it for granted. And you think about that expression of amazement that we all have every day as a result of technology. But we're also experiencing the WTF of dismay, which is the other way that people use that expression. So there are a lot of people who are hearing, warnings about how AI and robots are going to take their jobs. Here's a recent study from Oxford University that 47% of jobs are at risk of being automated in the next 20 years. We have a lot of people in Silicon Valley talking about universal basic income. Not a bad idea at all, but as T.S. Eliot said, this last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. It's not the right reason that there will be no work to go around. We have to understand, is there really nothing left for humans to do? So people are increasingly unhappy, and they're afraid about tech, and there's begun a tech backlash. The Occupy movement was targeted at Wall Street. Today's equivalent is increasingly targeted at tech. We've been there before. Everybody knows about the Luddite Rebellion of 1811, 1812. They probably don't know that Ned Ludd didn't actually exist. He was mythical even in 1811. And they also have come to identify the weavers with this idea of technological resistance. We don't want change. And that's not what it was all about at all. The Luddites wanted a seat at the table. They wanted to be part of the conversation. And that's what we see today. And what we also see is that both the weavers and the mill owners had a massive failure of imagination. Neither the weavers nor the mill owners could imagine the bounty that came from that industrial revolution. They couldn't imagine that their descendants would have more clothing than the kings and queens of Europe in their day. They couldn't imagine that ordinary people would be eating fruit in the depths of winter. They couldn't imagine just this bounty that was produced by the Industrial Revolution. And they couldn't imagine that we'd build skyscrapers half a mile high, that we'd go into space, that we'd split the atom, that we'd dig a tunnel between England and France, that we'd fly through the air, that we'd land on the moon, that we would, in fact, increase the life expectancy of their grandchildren almost to double what their own life expectancy was. And it's kind of amazing. You look at that graph from Our World in Data, a wonderful resource about the way the world is getting better, and you see that about the middle of the 19th century, this graph, which had been bouncing along for centuries without going anywhere, suddenly goes up and to the right. And as additional countries industrialize, life expectancy goes up. That's a pretty compelling WTF of delight, that technology and our market system has done something incredibly good. But it also has created this incredible set of issues, just as it did in the 19th century. And so one of the things I've been asking myself is, what is our failure of imagination as we look towards the future and we think about the jobless future, and we're feeding this fear and dismay about technology? And the thing that I think is driving dismay is this graph. And this is America. There's different versions of it in different places around the world. But basically, the dark blue line shows the productivity of our economy. And it keeps going up and to the right. That's the things that technologists like to celebrate. The light blue line is median family income, which starting around the mid to late 70s flattened out here in America. And that's what's created this disaffection, the rise of populism, the fear of progress and technology. And we have to understand what's causing that. And we're not asking the right questions. We should be asking what work needs doing. We need to ask how work is changing. Particularly, we have to ask, what does technology make possible today that was previously impossible? Okay? We also really need to ask, how do we make the world more prosperous for everyone? And why aren't we doing it? Right? So we've started to hear a lot about this from the economists and financial writers. Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century really, woke people up. Daron Acemoglu's Why Nations Fail, The Rise and Fall of States. on the financial side, makers and takers. Rana Foroohar's amazing book about the rise of the financial industry and the way that it's sort of undermined the rest of the economy. But I decided to talk about these issues from the point of view of technology, right? And in a lot of ways, the book is a meditation on what the great technology platforms have to teach us all about the future of work, business, and the economy. And so the first thing that I really start with is this idea that our maps of the world can steer us wrong. This is a fabulous map from 1625 that shows that they believed that California was an island. And there's a fabled expedition in which a group of missionaries, Spanish missionaries, actually dragged a boat across the Mojave Desert so that they could cross the ocean that they expected to find on the other side. There was no ocean on the other side. And it actually took many, many years before they actually got the map right. So similarly, and this is coming up to the beginnings of my career, in 1998, everybody thought that free software was the enemy of commercial software. Right? They thought, oh, this is the end. There were statements like Jim Allchin at Microsoft saying, open source is a cancer. It's going to destroy intellectual property. And in fact, what we all discovered was that open source software was the foundation of the next generation of computer applications, that there were new sources of value that would be created and vast new empires built. In 2005, this is what we thought the connected taxi cab looked like. We just put a screen in the back, credit card reader, we showed people ads. It wasn't until a few years later that we realized that we could match people up in real time. Drivers and passengers using this magic that was already in the smartphones. So in 2017, when we think that technology will take all the jobs and leave humans nothing to do, I think this is also an example of what I call framing blindness, where we interpret the future in terms of the past, and where we don't think through what is possible today. So here's what I think is happening. Now, first of all, I say it's happening gradually, then suddenly. That's a wonderful phrase from Ernest Hemingway. Originally used it in one of his novels about bankruptcy. One character asks another, how did you become bankrupt? And the guy says, 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. And I think, think about all of us who've been around technology, that's kind of how it happens. You see this slow accumulation of change, and then suddenly it snaps into focus, and it's just, then we're living in a new world. And I think we have to remember that, that there's this change that's happening all around us, and it's suddenly going to change into something rich and new. And that new, I think, is all tied up with the idea that the world is infused with the digital, that artificial intelligence and algorithmic systems are coming out of what we used to think of as the purely digital realm, entering the real world. And in that process, we're creating new kinds of partnerships between machines and human beings. And here's what that looks like. This is an amazing graph that shows what happened to Amazon's employment when they added 45,000 robots to their warehouses between 2014 and the middle of 2016. They added 250,000 human workers. And the interesting question is why? We have been told this story that you automate in order to get rid of people. And Amazon did something different. They said, when we add robots to the warehouses, we're going to actually be able to pack in more products. We're going to be able to ship those products more quickly. We're going to be able to get those products to people, more products to people next day. We're going to have a whole lot of products we can start to get to people in some zip codes same day, right? And so by doing more, rather than simply saying we're going to cut costs, they actually increase the number of workers. And actually, I know from talking with people who run their Amazon Flex service, which is on track to be, I was told, to be as big as Lyft in terms of the number of people driving for it. So there's also this huge delivery ecosystem. And Michael Mandel from the Progressive Policy Institute has actually studied the jobs that are being created. And despite a lot of the negative blowback, I'm not saying that Amazon's perfect, Mandel found that the jobs that are being created in warehouses actually pay better and have better working conditions than many of the jobs in retail that are being replaced. But more importantly, this is all an example of what Jeff Bezos calls the flywheel. That is, when you have greater selection, you have a better customer experience, you get more traffic, more sellers, lower cost structure, lower prices, it keeps going faster. And he spends all his time at Amazon trying to do more. And that really is the master design pattern, I think, of success in any economy, in any capitalist economy, certainly. But there's another point, and my friend Nick Hanauer, who is actually the first non-family investor in Amazon, he calls this the first law of capitalism, and that is when workers have more money, companies have more customers, and then hire more workers. Because, of course, it's a great cycle. And one of the things that the industrialists of the early Industrial Revolution forgot, and that we're forgetting today, is you can't have consumers unless you have a way for those people to afford your products. And there may be better ways, universal income might be one of them, than giving people jobs, but there are a lot of interesting tried and true solutions that we should be thinking about: reducing working hours, increasing pay, all kinds of things to keep that wonderful flywheel of the economy going. I also think we need to think about moving away from our consumption-based economy into new kinds of services, but there's a whole set of things to unpack there. But I also want to talk a little bit about the kinds of systems that we're building today in this world that's unfolding gradually, then suddenly. And the first idea that I want to get across is that the coming robots are not autonomous. When you see that, vision of the self-driving car, you think of it as a thing. It's the robot, that acts intelligently on its own. It's really not. It's part of a system. And that system includes people at all levels. It's a new kind of partnership between humans and machines. If it's Waymo and Google self-driving car, there's still the self-driving car is trained by human street view drivers who've already driven those streets with sensors, and all that data is remembered. There's people who are building them. Once we have fleets of self-driving cars, well, I think we'll actually build new kinds of services on top of using those self-driving vehicles. But I also think when you look at a system like Uber, you're going to see a mix of human and machine. And it's super important to understand, that dispatch capability. It's not just the smartphone that does that. It's not just the GPS satellite that does that. It's the data center and the dispatch algorithms. And there's something really interesting there, because those data centers are, again, managed by humans. There are people in them, not a lot of them on the physical level, but the people managing, directing those algorithms, building them, training them. And this is a new kind of partnership between human and machine. And there's a super interesting concept from biology called symbiogenesis. Lynn Margulis in 1967 kind of revived this idea, which was originally developed by some Russians around 1915. And it really was the idea that multicellular life was actually a colony organism of simpler cellular organisms. And it turns out that the mitochondria and chloroplasts, the organelles inside complex cells, have different DNA. This was eventually proven, different DNA than the cell nucleus. So effectively, we are made up as a colony of different kinds of organisms. And we know that also from the idea of the microbiome, that effectively we have more bacteria in our bodies than we have human cells, and they actually contribute to our functioning, they contribute to how we feel and how we think. And so I kind of like the idea of describing what's happening today as a kind of technological symbiogenesis. That is, we're building this new compound machine. The AI is not separate from us. We are living in the AI. And you can understand this when you think about a system like Uber and Lyft. You can see that it's this complex organism in some sense of humans and machines. You can also see it when you think about Google or Facebook. How our minds, what we think and what we learn is shaped by these machines. We're having a great discussion today about the extent to which Facebook shapes what we believe, shapes how we act. It shaped our election. And of course, it was shaped by humans. It shaped, but it also shaped us. So we have this incredible inflection point of humans and machines, not where the augmentation is not of our muscles but of our minds. The changes in our minds. Now, here's the thing: those algorithmic systems all have what you could call an objective function. In the book, I actually call it a fitness function because I tie it to an idea from evolutionary programming. Or actually from evolutionary theory about fitness landscapes. But you could also call it an optimization function. So you think about Uber and Lyft, they try to get, all of their systems are designed to get passengers picked up in 3 minutes. Google tries to get you to click on a result and have it be the right result the first time. Facebook tries to get you content that you're going to like and share and want to see more of. And turns out that scheduling systems used by companies like Walmart, The Gap, or McDonald's have as their objective function, let's reduce the number of hours that we use of human labor. Right? So they're telling it, cut and get rid of the humans. So one of the things I have to think about is, are we telling our algorithms the right things? Because like the jinn of Arabian mythology, our digital genies do exactly what we tell them to do. And just like in the stories, if you don't phrase your wish just right, it goes a little haywire. I don't know how many of you ever saw the movie Fantasia, in which Mickey Mouse, the sorcerer's apprentice, uses a spell to make the broomsticks help him with his chores, and they start multiplying and bringing more and more buckets of water and flooding his master's castle. That's the world that we are living in because we don't entirely understand this world we're living in. And of course, one of the things we have to understand is that our financial markets are also one of these great, symbiotic systems of human and machine, right? That's the Equinix NY4 data center. It's over in New Jersey. It's where trillions of dollars from Wall Street change hands. And that's relatively indistinguishable from a Google or a Facebook data center. So, we understand that when Mark Zuckerberg imagined that building algorithms that would feed people more of the content they liked, that would increase their community and their social connections. He didn't mean to increase hyperpartisanship. He didn't mean to create all these negative effects that everybody's now struggling with. And Facebook is working very hard to fix their algorithms to come to grips with this problem. But when you think about that NY4 data center and what's happening there, it tells us that we also have an objective function in our economy. And what is that? I like to make the case that it was designed starting in the 70s, beginning with this critical op-ed by Milton Friedman, where he said the social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. And over the next decade, particularly through the work of an economist named Michael Jensen, this became the basis of what's now referred to as shareholder value thinking. The idea that the only obligation, in fact, the legal obligation of a company is to make money for its shareholders, and if it does anything else, it's actually potentially legally liable. You'll hear people kind of put that out. And think about the financial statements of a company. People are a cost. The thing that we're trying to get to is what we call the bottom line. Right? The bottom line is more money. Now, that is actually the same kind of fitness function as picking up passengers in 3 minutes, getting people to click on a result. But we don't see it. We just sort of think, that's the way of the world. That's the way the world works. We're so part of that market-based organism that we don't even see it anymore. And so I think the job that we have to do is to debug the rules of our economy. A friend of mine, Andrew Singer, in the very early days of my career, I wrote a manual for him. It was for the first C compiler for the Macintosh. And he had this statement that he said, the art of debugging is figuring out what you really told your program to do instead of what you thought you told it to do. And that's a lovely description because, people mean well. They don't think that they're trying to do evil. but sometimes we do it anyway. And we have to come to grips with the consequences of what we designed. So my point is that it isn't technology that wants to eliminate jobs. That's what we are telling it to do. And I think we have to stop telling it to do that. And that's another lesson that I have from my life in technology, and that is that generosity triggers innovation. John von Neumann and his team at the Institute for Advanced Studies during World War II developed the fundamental structure of computing that we use today. We talk about the von Neumann architecture. It was funded by the US government, and guess what? Because of that, it was put into the public domain. Everything that followed depended on that. In 1982 or 81, when IBM was behind in this new market they didn't think really mattered, the microcomputer market, they did this catch-up play, which was to build a computer out of commodity parts, share the designs. Anybody could build them. They assumed that they would dominate the market. Don Estridge of IBM kind of developed this strategy. Bang, the PC market took off. Tim Berners-Lee put the World Wide Web into the public domain. And each of these times, we saw this huge explosion of innovation and advances. So that's the first thing we learned from the computer industry. The second thing is that over time, companies arise and they start to capture the value of that innovation. And then they often forget to keep the cycle going, and they start to capture too much of the value for themselves. And effectively, they drive everyone away. So Microsoft so thoroughly dominated the PC space that there was no opportunity left for developers. So they went over to the web, where at the time nobody actually thought you could make any money, but they just thought, well, we can make cool stuff. And this is a kind of a diagram of what they call a fitness landscape. It was actually adapted from a biology text, and I just kind of drew it with data in it instead. So there's this migration, or the point is that it's easier to get to a new peak often from the valleys, which is why we often see these ups and downs in the technology landscape. But the master pattern for escaping this is to remember to create more value than you capture, to build a long-lasting ecosystem. And I think that's, I guess, a key lesson. And I think there's a related way of framing this, which I got from a book called Who Gets What and Why. It's written by Alvin Roth, who got a Nobel Prize for his work on marketplaces. Now, the kind of marketplaces he was working on doing better designs for was the matching marketplaces for kidney transplants. But the idea that advances in matching marketplaces is a critical next stage of the technology evolution, I think is super important to recognize. I was actually pointed to this book by the chief economist at Uber, who said it was his Bible. You think about Uber and Lyft are a new kind of matching marketplace, making it easier for people who want something to find it. You look at all of our e-commerce, that's a lot of what it's about. And I think that, you can think of Google and the web as a matching marketplace for knowledge. Airbnb, obviously, matching marketplace. And we have to start thinking about all of the ways that this technology that we're building today will allow people to find new opportunities, to exploit them. I think there's a beginning of an opportunity to completely rethink the way that we exchange goods and services with each other with the aid of these new machines. And so, kind of coming back to what does technology want? It wants us to use these capabilities to solve problems. Again, back to Nick Hanauer. He said, prosperity in human societies is best understood as the accumulation of solutions to human problems. We won't run out of work till we run out of problems. Now, are we done yet? Does anybody think we're done with solving the world's problems? I don't. I mean, I look around, we got to deal with climate change. We've got terrible infrastructure, which we need to fix. We've got to feed the world, end disease, resettle refugees. Why is, Alphabet saying we should be building a new city for techies outside Toronto rather than saying, hey, let's go figure out what we could do to resettle the world's tens of millions of refugees? I guarantee you that solving the real problem is a far better business opportunity. We have to rethink, what does the caring economy look like? I think in the world of the future, caring is this huge opportunity. And above all, we have to figure out how we could enjoy the fruits of shared prosperity. All this technology is making the world richer, and we're allocating it to a small number of people rather than continuing to say, let's make the world better for everyone. So I really loved this idea from an essay that John Maynard Keynes wrote in 1929 called Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where he talked about what he called the true economic problem, which is how to use our freedom from pressing economic cares to occupy the leisure which science and compound interest will have won for us to live wisely and agreeably and well. Living well, building a human-centered world is in fact within our grasp. We have this amazing set of superpowers that we can use to make a better world. And we have to look at the world around us and say, why aren't we doing that? Why are we accepting the world as it is? Why are we putting the screen in the back of the taxi cab when we could be saying, this could be done completely differently? So we have framing blindness about economic policy and politics, not just technology. What would it take for us to put people to work tackling the world's greatest problems? What would it take for us to treat humans as assets, not liabilities? What would it take to create an economy based on caring and creativity? Let the machines focus on the repetitive tasks. What would it take for us to apply on-demand marketplace models to healthcare? I imagine augmenting community health workers with telemedicine and AI so we could all have house calls, not just rich people. Right? I imagine giving everyone access to knowledge on demand. I imagine having fresh approaches to public policy based on what's possible now, and by learning what works in the way that we have learned to do in the tech industry by measurement and test, right? Rather than just picking from set political menu, full of failed policies that we're going to try again based on our team versus your team. So that's why the key line in the title is actually not WTF, but what's the future? It's up to us. Thank you.
And now is the fun part where we get to ask some questions. I know. Oh, there's Baratunde. There we go.
Hey, Tim. Baratunde Thurston here.
Yeah.
I'll try to keep it brief. It seems like you haven't, maybe you do in the book, and I will buy it, to take the step to say that we need new rules. Part of what's missing, it's not an accident, it was designed this way.
Yeah.
The wealth inequality was the result of tax policies as well, not
absolutely.
just machinery. And the definition of marketplace seems a bit incomplete. I would cite Anil's view of Uber, which is a buyer and seller, they can't find each other, they can't set their own prices. So it's neat that Uber has an economist, but that economist doesn't actually know what a marketplace is or would let the drivers determine their own rates and what routes they want to run, et cetera. I guess I'm still reeling from, you provoked a lot, but I want to know your thoughts on what our mechanism is for actually changing the rules. Great questions. Do you have any answers in that space? Because that seems to be the thing that we're not doing. And the people who have the power don't really have an incentive to let the rest of the people in to start mucking around with their algorithms, mucking around with their economic rules.
Well, a lot of people, first of all, think that these systems are so powerful. And yes, they are powerful. But I do think that the very first thing that we have to do, and what I'm really calling for, is a set of beliefs about a different future. Because, and actually it was interesting, I read a review of Rutger Bregman's Utopia for Realists, which is a really interesting book about universal basic income. And he actually talked about the need for non-specific futurism. Like when you get too specific, you're typically wrong. What it is we need this belief that it can be different, and we need people to start searching more aggressively for what that future is. And I do think that that belief is so central. I just sort of imagine all of the great social movements, that we honor in our history. Think about the struggles for democracy over centuries. I like to say, we used to all believe in the divine right of kings, You know, we didn't. And then some guy from Europe said, "Hey, you know, I'm from one of those barbarian countries that sort of, you know, fought that for centuries until Charlemagne rammed it down our throats." You know, But you think about the the American Revolution. You know, when we won the American Revolution, George III expected George Washington to be crowned King of America. You know, and when he didn't, the world was agog. You know, and it set the world on fire. And I think that we may be at the point of one of those gradually then suddenly moments when we start to find new ways of organizing society. And it's going to happen gradually, then slowly. But I also think about, movements, which we're still struggling with. You know, I think about, the challenges of people of color in this country. I think about the challenges, the forgotten challenges of the genocide on which this country was based. It's kind of brought a little bit to the back with Standing Rock, but there's so many issues where it's pretty clear it is struggle, but it is also we start to believe something different. And of course, we're in the middle of a backlash where people are kind of going back in some very negative directions, believing things that I think will make the world move in a worse direction. But it is a struggle for what we believe, because what we believe shapes what we try to build.
Hi there, my name's Dylan. Some of the mechanisms that you describe for encouraging incentive to, encouraging new incentives for solving these big problems that you're outlining is allowing kind of marketization and economization of new zones in society, zones that have not capitulated to kind of neoliberalism finding its fingers in all of the aspects of existence today. And there are, as we're seeing with healthcare in America and the problem of refugees, we are seeing that there are certain problems that are simply not suited to being solved by marketization, by incentive building, by letting a certain corrupted self-interest create opportunities. And I'm wondering that very capitalist mentality that marketization can solve any problem we have. How do you respond to the moral and kind of equitable conundrums that poses?
Yeah, I guess I would say first off that I think that we have this very narrow idea, which we've been sold, of what markets do and the natural rules of markets. When you look at, for example, the period of post-war productivity, that was also our markets at work. And it was our market that was shaped actually by a very bad experience that the world had after the First World War, where we made a series of very, very bad choices. This great war, and then the winners punished the losers. Basically we saw the rise of incredible inequality till there was a crash. It was this bubble that happened. And then we saw this worldwide depression, and then another world war. And after World War II, everybody kind of talks about, sure, there were structural things, but we did not have to decide to rebuild Europe and Japan after World War II, but we did. That was a moral choice. It was a pragmatic choice also. And I think that kind of enlightened self-interest. I think there's a wonderful thing. The essay that Joseph Stiglitz wrote, a famous economist, wrote that actually coined the term the 1%, actually talks a little bit about this wonderful passage in Alexis de Tocqueville where he talks about the genius of the American character is self-interest properly regarded. And self-interest properly regarded means that you do look after other people. And the other thing that's really wonderful, I recently bought a book called How Adam Smith Can Change Your Life by Russ Roberts. I expected it to be kind of this libertarian document about the wealth of nations. And it's instead a wonderful expose of Adam Smith's other great book. In fact, the one that he wanted to be remembered for. It's called The Theory of Moral Sentiments. It's about why people want to be good, why people want to be thought well of by their peers, why is it that people are altruistic? And I think this idea that markets are intrinsically hostile to human values is this bill of goods that we got sold. I think we can build humane markets. We also got sold a bill of goods about how the collective action of governments is something that we should not, be trusting. And I look at all the gifts that government has done. Another book I highly recommend, Mariana Mazzucato's Entrepreneurial State, which is all about the role of technology in innovation, particularly in technological innovation in all the world that we live in. So I actually think that, and then I guess there is the point that our market economy is shaped by the rules and above all by this sort of optimization function that treats people as a cost. And I think if we, if we built a new set of rules that run our economy as opposed to the rules that we live by right now, which is maximize, capital returns. We confuse the market, we say the market of real goods and services with financial markets. We reward people for speculation. When Carl Icahn buys shares in Apple, that's not investment. Why does that get favored tax treatment? That's gambling revenue. He's trying to be gambling that he can make the stock go up. Apple didn't need any money from Carl Icahn. It's extractive. We should have a punitive tax on that kind of behavior. So there's all kinds of interesting ways, should capital gains tax go up and down? You go, well, actually, 85% of the activity, in our markets today, our financial markets, actually our overall, exchanging of money is buying and selling futures. What's the future value of a stock? What's the future value? All that crazy stuff that we saw, that led up to the, 2009 crash. It's basically this giant gambling market, and we don't even recognize that. We call it the same thing as investing in the real market of goods and services exchanged by people. And all of that money that's gone into that market could instead, going back to that graph I showed earlier, that could have been going into higher wages, lower working hours, better conditions, new kinds of benefits. It's interesting because I talked with the famous labor economist David Autor about universal basic income, and I said, well, are there any natural experiments? And he said, well, yeah. There's Saudi Arabia and Norway, two countries with a lot of oil wealth. And he said in Saudi Arabia, they used it to create a privileged elite where they brought in all these guest workers who would do all the work that they thought was beneath them. Not a very nice society. In Norway, everybody works, all work is valued, everybody just works a little less. And I go, that's a society, that's also a market society, and one that we could be building if we actually thought about how would we design that world. Because again, we take there's this narrative that says the world we've got is somehow natural. It's somehow inevitable that the market wants, to get rid of people, to make, every company as cheap as possible. This is a goodness, as opposed to looking at history and going, actually, generosity is actually leads to a better economy.
Hi. You spoke very convincingly about solving a whole host of really wicked problems. And you said, you talked about, debugging the rules of the economy. But isn't something like inequality actually a feature of a capitalist system, not a bug? In other words, like if you have winners, aren't there necessarily losers? And I wanted to use that as kind of a window to sort of problematize this idea of problem solving. And do we need to revisit that concept? Because we're not talking about problems that have linear solutions or perhaps that have solutions at all.
Yeah.
So I wanted to hear your thoughts on what that problem solving process looks like.
Well, first off, I guess I would say that yes, there are, I do think that the capitalist system, any kind of competitive system, does produce winners and losers. And we did have a vast experiment in, everybody's equal, and that didn't work out so well. And so now everybody says, well, that didn't work. So, now we're all in tech. Come on. Did we ever just basically try one thing, it didn't work, and then go back to the old thing? You know, we went, that didn't work. Okay, let's try something else. Let's try something else. Let's try something until we figure out what works. Why aren't we doing more experiments to figure out what works? You know, and so I think that the you know, the idea that you need, you know, massive inequality to drive the capitalist system. Now, I will say the capitalist system has proven to be incredibly powerful. That's why I showed that graph of rising living conditions. You know, and if you go to Our World in Data, you'll see graph after graph that shows that. But, you know, and I've had this argument with people like Paul Graham, where he says, well, if I don't create billionaires, you know, it's like you're telling me I shouldn't be doing that. And I go, no, I'm not. It's like, did Andy Grove and Gordon Moore and Bill Hewlett and David Packard actually say, nah, you know, unless we can become billionaires, we're not going to go create Silicon Valley? You know, no, of course not. You know, it's like the returns now, you know, it's like, you know, there's some kid who builds some, you know, lightweight app that doesn't amount to much who expects to become a billionaire. You know, the returns in our industry, the returns to Wall Street, the returns to so many areas are so disproportionate to the value, and the incentives are so out of whack. And we bought that, you know, it's like, I look at my company, it's a private company. You know, I don't get that super money. There's a whole chapter in the book called Super Money, you know, about the, you know, our aspiration to this money that's worth so much more than what ordinary people get. We have to stop believing that that's, you know, the driver of innovation. You know, there was plenty of incentive long before you got the CEOs being paid thousands of times what ordinary people get.
Hello, Tim. Welcome to Book Row. My nickname's Roman Cat, and when you look at healthcare, let's take a look at that. We started, it was built long ago on charity, okay? Protestant hospitals, Catholic hospitals, Jewish hospitals, and we lost our way somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay, we went to the first internet revolution, which was the internet of information, and now we're coming into the next revolution, which a lot of people are getting involved with, Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptocurrency. A lot of people are calling it the internet of value. Okay, but what a lot of people are not getting, that this internet of value is not just about dollars and cents. It's about value. And there are many different types of value that can be monetized and added. And taking, you know, it's like moving forward to, maybe let's go back to the early days of what started healthcare. Your comments.
Yeah, so when I think about healthcare, I think a lot about, you know, this incredible opportunity for reinvention. You know, it's pretty clear we're in the middle of amazing discoveries in genomics, in personalized medicine, in the application of AI to various kinds of healthcare problems. And if we basically do it within the context of the current system, you know, yeah, we may get some cost savings, we may get some better health outcomes, but we're not really taking the opportunity to rethink the opportunity. And you know, again, I'm not trying to predict the future, but I do think there's a set of design principles. And one of those design principles that you see from the very beginning of any kind of human technology is you augment people to do things that were previously impossible. And when you do that, you end up, you know, coming up with new business processes, new ways of thinking. And when I imagine healthcare of the future, first of all, I imagine we all like the human touch, you know, when we need it, you know, when we're feeling scared about something in our health. You know, we've already seen a huge amount of evidence that human interaction will lead to better health outcomes. You know, the whole idea of health hotspotting and being able to tell people, you know, to identify using data the people who are the heavy consumers, anticipate and do preventative medicine with those people. You can literally imagine for what they call the frequent flyers in healthcare that having a personal health aid would A, put people to work, and B, would actually reduce the costs in our healthcare system. So I imagine you know, a healthcare system in which we have millions of people put to work as kind of community health workers. They're upskilled with AI, you know, in the same way that, say, an Uber driver can find their way around with the aid of Google Maps. Here's somebody who, you know, has again, Paul Farmer's done this without technology in Partners for Health, where you get community health workers that get a level of training and they work with people in the community. You go, could you imagine how much better our healthcare system would be if we said, wow, very few people need to go to the hospital. Let's go out there and give them the care where they need it. And so, again, complete restructuring is possible in one of these moments. And the question is, again, what's keeping us from getting there? And it's going to be a long process. I know people who are working on it, but they're doing it with this idea of how are we going to augment workers with these new capabilities so that they can deliver better service? I think the same thing's true in education. And one of the quotes I have in the book is this a line from Hal Varian, Google's chief economist, and he talks about something that, first time I heard it, I thought, oh my God, this is the worst thing, the worst of Silicon Valley. The statement is, if you want to understand the future, just look at what rich people do today. And you go, oh man, that sounds like, something right out of the valley, right? But think about it for a minute. It's like rich people used to go on the grand tour of Europe. If you've ever flown on Ryanair, you now know you can fly for $29. And soccer hooligans follow their teams all over Europe. So clearly been democratized. Maybe some other side effects of that, but fabulous piece called "Among the Thugs" by Bill Buford that talks about soccer hooligans in Europe. But when I imagine what do rich people do today that I wish would be democratized, and I go, well, they send their kids to schools, with a high teacher-student ratio. So I go, wow. We say, there's nothing left for people to do. I go, yeah, all we have to do is give everybody the same kind of education that rich people get today, with small class size. We put millions of people to work as teachers. We would have way better educational outcomes if everybody, in the world had a teacher and a mentor, and that teacher was augmented with all this knowledge and the best tools, of AI. And, again, people like Neil Stephenson wrote about this, a long time ago. But just think about that. It's like, why aren't we doing that? And I think it's because we've designed a market system that's doing the wrong thing. And that's why I'm so excited in a lot of ways about this Facebook moment, because everybody is starting to understand, and this is why Data and Society and your work is so important. We're in this moment where we can see that we're designing systems that don't always do what we meant them to do. And we're seeing that they're teaching us, they become a mirror for our collective behavior and our collective beliefs. And I think that's why it's such an opportunity for us to understand that our society is framed by all these choices that we make in these systems. And I'm trying to extend that thinking from the world of technology, where we can all see it, to the world of economics and policy, where we think that it's just natural. Oh, actually, yeah.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, I've spent the last 5 years in Silicon Valley. I had some kind of history with the culture before that. And then previous to that, I did a lot of activism, social justice, and public health work. And one thing that I have been thinking about a lot lately is the kind of emerging political identity in Silicon Valley. I think to some extent it's had a little bit of a separationist sense about it. I don't know if you would agree. Mm-hmm. But to me, it feels like a little bit of the perspective that you're outlining in your book. It feels a little bit political, for lack of a better phrase. And it makes me curious about whether there are political threads that you see happening in the Valley right now that you're excited about, particularly in regards to kind of concrete outcomes, like specific amounts of money being donated, specific initiatives, that kind of thing. It seems like the industry is really in a crucible moment right now. You mentioned Facebook. And it seems like there's a big opportunity to figure out what the new identity of tech is going to be and how it's going to respond. Yeah. And I think that leaders like you have an opportunity to shape that, but it feels a little bit like the questions that you're posing here are very big picture. So I'm sort of asking you what it would mean to you to bring it down to the small picture a little bit. Like, what are the donations? Who are the candidates? What are the political parties? What sort of organizations would you support? Like, what do we do today and tomorrow and this week, not just like over our lifetimes?
Yeah, no, I understand. I guess I would say I can't make recommendations on specific candidates. I think that probably the biggest thing that I would say is we have to stop, choosing from the set menu. I would love to see candidates who break from the orthodoxy of, well, I'm on this side of the line or I'm on that side of the line. And I'm hoping that we're reaching, one of those breaking points where people realize that, this sort of party line, this always goes with that, and this always goes with that, is just wrong, and we start getting new candidates who are willing to espouse fresh ideas. And I do think that we have actually seen, it's the one, if there's one positive thing that I can say about what happened with Donald Trump is he kind of broke what's called the Overton window. It's this concept of certain things were acceptable to talk about or to do in politics, and he kind of blew it away. And so now maybe there can be a discussion where people can come in, and it's not just going to be, well, we're going to go from your team to our team and back, and that we can start to make a new politics. And so I guess I would just say look for candidates who are thinking fresh ideas. I do think that there are people who are starting to engage with ideas like just for example on the benefits. I think about and I talk about this in the book. How systems like Uber and Lyft have caused us to question whether the idea of W-2 versus 1099, for example, as a means of worker protection is broken. Or whether we go, well, heck, if we can track all these workers and we can manage their hours, why can't we just track and manage benefits, social benefits, so they track the person rather than the job? Why are we hung up on this old industrial notion that you work for one employer and your benefits get routed through them? All the stuff we're fighting with over healthcare is kind of a new policy prescription. We're starting to really talk, universal healthcare in this country. And I see that so again, that would be something I'd look for as a, for me, if there's an interesting litmus test issue, there are things like that. It's like, how are we going to get to that? How are we going to do it completely differently than the way we did it before, rather than little tweaks? And again, I don't know that I see. We also have some very urgent issues just around. The direction of our politics, where you've got one party that's really trying to entrench itself through gaming the ballot box, gerrymandering and so on. And I think we really, in a lot of ways, I think we just have to, break that. But, I'm not a political strategist. I don't know what races are the ones that are going to be the ones to really tip. I know that there are people like Reid Hoffman who's spending a lot of time thinking about that. And, I think there's also a lot of good thinking going on in local communities. One of the things, my wife Jen Palka is here, and she runs something called Code for America, which is involving tech people in working with actually making government programs work better, because that's again something we can do from the tech industry. How do we actually improve services for all the people of this country? We've had this narrative that government is bad, partly because government services are sort of stuck in the last century, and then there's a whole set of people who are trying, let's just get rid of them, as opposed to no, let's actually make them better. It's kind of like as if we said, well, we all hate Windows, so let's just stop using computers. Maybe we would have been better off, but instead we kind of built the internet, and I think that the opportunity is again reinventing government. So I'm not primarily a politics guy, even though this is a political agenda.
Hi, thanks so much, Tim, and congratulations on the release of the book. My name is Mary Madden. I'm a researcher here at Data and Society. I had a question that relates to one of the sort of big pieces of your puzzle that I'm guessing you touch on in the book, but you didn't mention in your talk, which is the role of the advertising industry in fueling the growth and innovation in the tech economy. And you mentioned that one of your sort of key asks for companies is to trying to create more value than they capture. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about how advertising can seek to create more value than it captures in that frame.
Well, I feel like there was a breakthrough, in around the turn of the millennium with with Google's ad auction. When Larry and Sergey's initial moral repugnance against the model of advertising, was no, we want to make advertising that people will want to click on in the same way that they click on search results, that they'll get what they're looking for, and Google really built something remarkable that did, I think, create a lot of value even through advertising. I think they gradually, came to turn to the dark side, because like every other company, they are ultimately subject to the master AI, which is the market that says thou must continue to grow and increase your profits, or you won't keep getting this super money that we give you, that we bestow on you as a result of doing that. And I think that that's a really interesting way that advertising has helped. I think that we then kind of have gone down the path where I think what I see almost always with new technologies is they start out, there's a lot of good things, and then we start loading in more and more, and they start going down the wrong path. And now we've kind of gone to this model of advertising as addiction, and how do we create addictive experiences? And Silicon Valley needs to get off of that. I mean, seriously. And and we are starting to see the revolution against that. It's going to be a long haul, though, and I don't think it will really happen until we come up with something new and compelling in a different way. But we're already seeing, that we're starting to rediscover the value of subscription businesses, for example, where people pay for what they want. That advertising-driven news media was part of the problem. I mean, people like to point the finger at Facebook, but hey, our newspaper journalism started to get its spine back when it actually saw it could actually get subscribers who cared about them doing real reporting, as opposed to having to chase, the story in order to get the most clicks. And I think business models do matter. And actually, I didn't actually put this in the book, but I have a separate talk that I give about business models, in which I, for example, contrast, even though Google and Facebook both have ad business models, Google's original ad business model is actually very different from Facebook's. And a business model, we need to get below the level of, well, it's just advertising. I do think that there's incredible opportunities in a lot of businesses to there's going to be breakthroughs like Google AdWords in areas like insurance. For example, I think that the natural business model of big data and the Internet of Things is actually insurance. Because you actually have so much more knowledge that you're not sort of measuring risk in the same way. And there's going to be some really interesting breakthroughs. And again, they should be based on this idea of how do you create more value using the deeper knowledge that you have, rather than how do you extract more value.
I'm happy to close this up.
I think we're running on. Yeah.
Hi, thanks. I'm still sort of stuck up on your first or second slide about the Luddites and thinking about them and that as a metaphor for now. So I know it's not a perfect metaphor, but first of all, you're making a very nuanced argument, and I'd like to know how that doesn't come across as just smash the looms up. That's kind of interesting. Like there's a misinterpretation there. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Yeah. So saying how do we make it so that this nuanced argument doesn't come across as just like smash the looms up like the Luddites, like people think they are now.
Yeah.
But also there's an interesting thing in that metaphor, which is that the the Luddites campaign was talking about regulating and unionizing and giving rights to workers about a technology that fundamentally everyone, including the government, could understand, like, really well. You could just figure out this is a loom, it does weaving faster, whatever, you know. Governments can't really understand most of the technology that we're talking about today. Technologists can, but governments can't. So how do you get that regulatory framework that can, I don't know what they do, but how do they even have an informed opinion about this?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I do agree. I will say that I'm not convinced that everyone, in government could understand that in those days. I don't think that people understood, just where that was going. I mean, if they had, it would have gone forward much faster. Yeah. Again, I think we overstate our understanding or lack of understanding. If you look at actually the evolution of those machines, it took 40 years for them to get to, or 40, 50 years from the first ones for them to get to a mature state. They were not that well understood, any more than our, and I am quite convinced that there were, landowners who were like, I don't, buy these newfangled things. I don't understand them. I don't, don't overestimate the complexity of today's technology relative to the technology of the past, and don't underestimate how long it takes. I mean, again, I look at, for example, the early, the spinning jenny is equivalent to, Apache 1.0, or whatever, and you saw this 30, 40, 50 years, and now we're kind of getting to the full, factory, Lowell, Massachusetts, 1840, that's like almost 100 years after the spinning jenny, when the first fully integrated factories, and here we are, we're 35 years into the World Wide Web, 50, 60, years into the, the widespread, democratization of computing. And, it actually, it's about on schedule.
So.
Yeah. Jen, well, actually, here, you want to say? She wants me to make this point.
I'm going to close this up first.
Okay. All right.
I'm recognizing we're out of time, but I want to close with one question for you. This is a room full of people who, for all intents and purposes, are debuggers, right?
Yeah.
Cultural debuggers, socio-technical debuggers. We look at the dynamics of technology and society, and we think about all of the things that have and can go wrong. What's your ask of us? What's our responsibility in light of your call for thinking about the ideal world when most of us spend a lot of time thinking about all of the things can go wrong? What should we be doing other than just getting idealistic?
Well, I think the first thing that I would suggest is don't just point fingers. I mean, I think it's really easy for all of us to identify people to blame. And I see, for example, right now there's a lot of Facebook blame. And I like to think of technology as a mirror that's helping us to understand ourselves better. And yes, we are debuggers, and we should share what we learn in a spirit of improving the world through more clarity. And that's kind of what we're working on. And I guess I feel like there's no magic bullets. I do want to answer the thing that I know Jen was wishing I would say, which is education really matters. The fact is, government does have to understand technology better. We do need people, that's one of the things that, I know she works on is how do you get more people like you into public service so that we don't have that degree of ignorance of technology in the parties, in the places where the decisions are being made. But I think, so I guess I would just say, one of the things I would urge all of you to do is, in fact, to go into positions where you can influence this discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much.